All right, we are going to dig in today on a little bit of the orgasm gap. And I kind of feel like men have this direct flight to Pleasure Island. They're always going to have this direct flight. They're going to get to Pleasure Island. And for women, I feel like there can be a little bit of a flight delay, changing your gates. You get where you're almost to the gate, and then they change the gate up a little bit, or just completely miss a connection completely. So let's talk about that.
You're listening to the Cheeky Clinic podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Delp.
And I'm Cat Parker-Delp, owner of Duluth Med Spa.
If you've arrived at a point in life where good enough is simply just not good enough for you, you're in the right place.
Here we cover topics like sexual health and wellness, hormonal balance, and body optimization. And we deliver to you lessons from our travels from hard-to-get-to places around the world.
We are so excited you're here to venture off the beaten path with us into the taboo, where no subject is off limits.
Welcome to the Cheeky Clinic. Let's dive in.
Well, I think men are efficient. We are very efficient creatures. We are objective based. It's not about the journey. It's about completing the job, and that may influence a little bit about influence the orgasm gap. But it is a significant gap when you look. There's now starting to get all this research, which is great. We're now at a point where we're actually looking at this, and the research going into all this orgasm gap is kind of fun to read, and it's worth talking about because it is
It matters.
big gap.
It really matters.
I mean, between around 95% of the time, the men are successful versus 40 to 60%, depending on the research of the women. So going into that as a man, knowing that it's a less than 50% chance that my partner is going to have an orgasm, that's a little distressing, I think.
Well, that, and I think that sometimes it may have to do with, are we talking cisgender? You have, that plays a role too.
Mm-hmm.
Women themselves can typically reach orgasm if they're alone.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest, it's just is what it is. But where do you think that gap is in men? I think some of it is knowledge-based and men knowing women's bodies, or that they are just on that direct flight to Pleasure Island and they're not thinking about the ways that the connections can get missed there.
I just saw a great video about when you talk about men not knowing women's bodies. It was just a woman going around with an anatomical drawing of the female external parts, and then going up to people on the street, men in the street, and saying, can you point out where the clitoris is? And it was distressing where the men were looking at her and pointing at different 100% of the time they could identify the vagina. And the first 10 people that she went up to, none of them could identify where the clitoris was. And so you're right. Part of that may be just lack of knowledge there. And when you talk about the differences, the orgasm rates between lesbian women is much better. As a matter of fact, a heterosexual female with a male has the lowest orgasm rates of all of when you talk transgender, when you talk bisexual women, lesbian, all of that. The heterosexual female engaged with a cis man has the lowest orgasm rate of any. So you guys are kind of getting gypped out.
Yeah.
One of the things I was reading about is that part of that it has to do with what we see in popular media, and that when you step outside of that role, we all see, the typical sex, then the woman is supposed to have an orgasm with penetrative sex, and that's kind of the expectation. But there's no expectations when it comes to other relationships besides that. So the communication has to be better. You have to ask what feels good, what doesn't have to be good, but there's an expectation that you're going to feel good with what I'm doing, and that expectation may be part of the reason why the orgasm rates are so low.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that for men, I mean, and maybe some of that, like I said, is knowledge, but that most orgasms with women are not internal. Most women don't have an internal orgasm. It's external. And so I think that there could be more female orgasms reached should the male not be done and assume that the sex is over. For him, he's reached Pleasure Island. He took that jet, he got there, and he's on the island. Now you've got, the person over here trying to still get to the connecting flight, and she can still get to Pleasure Island. She can still get there. Sex is not over for anybody that needs an external orgasm right then. I think that sex can continue on after the fact.
No, but then it's nap time for the guy. No, I think that you're right. And when you talk about the female orgasm and where it comes from, it's, for men, all of the sensation is in the penis, and the vagina is not the sensation where all the sensation is for the women. So it'd be the equivalent of you expecting a man to orgasm by rubbing his kneecap. And there may be a few men that can do that.
We are strange creatures.
Yeah, we are very curious and strange creatures. And that may very well happen, but it isn't for the majority. So if your expectation is to rub a guy's kneecap and have him come to climax, we're having the same expectation for women. It's very rare for them to have an orgasm just with penetrative sex. So, and then
but I don't think a lot of men know that. I think that there's a gap there. That's where some of that orgasm gap is. There's a lot of men that truly think that women are going to get to that climax through penetrative sex, and it's not the case for most women. For most women, we are more likely to hit orgasm alone. But it's just not the case. I think there is a gap in knowledge there.
Well, and there's a gap in expectations. Is there any movies that depict that? And there certainly are, but most of the popular movies all depict women coming to climax with penetrative sex. And so
that's true. I agree.
And
it's fair.
There may be some reinforcement there, because there may be women, because there's that expectation, may lead a man to believe that was an orgasm for them as well, because that's the expectation, and then you feel badly if you don't, like there's something wrong with you. When there's not, it's completely the opposite. It'd be rare for you to achieve orgasm that way. So you gotta change that up. You've got to start to help men, I think, a little bit, and that involves something that a lot of men aren't really good about, which is communication, and also the not to be so goal driven. You want to pregame, and pregaming for sex is a huge deal.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
It's the appetizer.
Exactly. And women need more time. And for a man not to skip the pregame is an important part of this. So knowledge base.
Pregame can be the best part of it for a lot of people.
It certainly can be. And if sex is worth having, it's also worth enjoying. When you talk about a foodie doesn't just gorge themselves on the main meal. They take their time, they enjoy every part of it.
Right.
And I think that's another part of that. But when we talk about knowledge and this idea that men can't even find the clitoris, much less know what to do with it, and they're not comfortable with that. So what can a woman do to I mean,
Conversation.
the
Conversation. I think that women should feel more comfortable saying, this is where I want to be touched. This is what feels good. And I think there's a lot of women who I think it comes in some people's the way they were raised or the way that they were brought up, that you just don't really talk about that. I think that's changing in our times now, but I think it is also partly the woman's responsibility to not let the man assume that getting to Pleasure Island on the fast jet is pleasing her, because you have the typical the fake an orgasm conversation. And I mean, well, being married to me, I'm not going to fake an orgasm. It's just not going to happen. We're going to get there. It is what it is. So, but I think there's a lot of women, unlike me, who are not willing to tell their partner what they need or what they want. I don't know whether that's just being that they're uncomfortable with that, but there's a lot of women that don't feel comfortable telling their partner where to touch them or how to touch them, too hard, too soft. I think that has a lot to do with it. So it is both a male and female issue. It's not just a male issue.
Well, and again, going back to popular media, you look at men and we're expected to know. And so when you are directing me, it would be very easy to take that as I don't know what I'm doing. And that's really hard for men. We are raised to know what we're doing,
Right.
and there's this popular image that we should be able to please you. And any indication that we're not can be especially if you're
Deflating.
already a little bit nervous about performance, and in a new relationship, sometimes you're really nervous about performance, and then she says that. Does that mean I'm no good? I mean, how can you do that? Oftentimes the male pride can be very sensitive for a variety of different reasons. So how do you approach that? I think that one of the things that I like is just asking, giving the woman permission, and just say, I want you to tell me faster, slower,
What do you
softer,
like?
harder.
Right.
Just those 4 things would be very, very good to know. As well as, for some men, just a little guidance in terms of female anatomy, where you need to go,
Right.
which I
Right.
think
Right.
is great.
Do you think there's any in as far as relationships go, the longer someone's in a relationship, the more likely, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I feel like initial encounters of sex, there's probably less orgasm in that
There's data, yeah.
versus having somebody that you have a sexual relationship with learning you. So I think there is something to say. They say that there's less people usually don't have a orgasm in their first encounter with someone.
So when you think about when you fall in love, the food tastes better, the day seems brighter, and the sex is better. Intimacy is, I think, can be very erotic, and the more intimate you are, the more erotic it can become. And some of the body imaging can change too. There's this whole concept of spectatoring, where the women, and it tends to be more of a women problem, thinking about, what do I look like? What is he thinking? And being outside themselves, looking down. And men don't tend to be quite that way. I've heard an analogy of what it's like to be a woman's brain, and it's like having a browser open with 2,000 tabs open all the time. And men are not quite that way. I think that there's a big difference. I see it in you. You are thinking, you're multitasking, thinking.
All the time.
Yeah,
Firing.
it's crazy
Constant.
that your browser, it does have all these tabs open, and you're monitoring all your tabs all your time. And when you ask me what I'm thinking, it's just what I told you. We have a good friend, just as an illustration of that his wife asked him, what do you think about going to this cathedral in Europe? Do you want to do that? And he said, no, I don't. And she said, well, can we talk about it? And he said,
We just
we
did.
just did. So there's a difference, I think, in the way that that thought process and how to get in and out of your head, and to be in a relationship longer means that you're a little bit more comfortable, and you're probably not thinking as much about me noticing anything about you. If you've got a zit that's coming up after 10 years of marriage, you don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. But if it's a first date, sure, you're
Yeah.
thinking, I wonder if he's looking at.
Yeah. I think too, part of that gap as we age can be hormones related, which is we can talk hormones all day long on a different episode, but I think that some of that can be hormone related, and women certainly, as when we are of before menopausal age, our hormones throughout the month are different time periods, and there's times when we're more excitable and times when we're not excitable. So I think hormones play a lot in that as far as timing too.
Absolutely. And men tend to not have that issue, and so we're thinking, well, doesn't she want me anymore? What's the deal there? And that can very much doesn't have anything to do with want or love, but our hormones do regulate us. Our body communicates with hormones, and that functions in arousal, and including there's other hormones or peptides that your body uses to communicate arousal, and those all change as we age.
Yeah.
So sex and age, I think that'd be a great idea for another podcast, just to talk about sexuality and aging, especially since getting old.
I'm not getting any younger.
Exactly. So I
We've
think
got some
that
peptides for that.
that might be a really good good subject for future discussion.
Yeah.
Is sex and
aging.
Um,
It is definitely different, as you're older and hormones change.
It is, and that
But it doesn't change the orgasm.
Well, there's some the frequency of orgasm does that orgasm gap does increase, according to one research study, that as you age, that orgasm gap increases, and that can be hormonal related. It can be more painful for women when they don't have estrogen, and they have vaginal atrophy, and there's all sorts of changes that can occur that increase that orgasm gap as we age, and so that can be another component of all of that.
Yeah.
That we'll dive into. I think sex and aging is a whole nother episode.
I agree. There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that.
And that's one that we should probably block our children from watching, because the idea of older parents having sex is just not very palatable for.
It happens.
Yeah. No, even me, I thinking about my parents. I don't even want to think about it. So we'll give them some advanced warning and make sure they don't watch that. So we've talked about that there's a lot of this is can be men issues, and that we need to have kind of a cooperative solution, because men tend to be objective oriented. They tend to have some assumptions about
Mm-hmm.
how sex should be, both men and women, but that this is the way that sex should be. There may be a little bit of a knowledge gap in terms of just general female anatomy and how to correct that. And that's all it's going to require, some communication with the women, and they've got to be willing
You've got
to
to be
do
willing
that.
to do that.
Yeah.
Definitely. You got to be willing to let your partner know what you want and what you need, if you're not getting that portion of it.
So they were doing a study just looking at the women that have rated their sexual satisfaction, and their sexual satisfaction also revolved around communicating after sex, having playful texts, a little humor, flirting.
After sex or before sex?
After sex, that
Okay.
they tended to dress up more. They tended to be more open in fantasy talk. These were all kind of common characteristics that, yeah, just to keep the interest afterwards, because they don't need. It's great to do that at any time, but they were
Mm-hmm.
talking about what kind of things, what kind of common characteristics of sexually satisfied women there were. But that kind of communication, role play,
Yeah.
fantasy play. But again, coming back to the communication part, that's going to be
It
huge.
comes down. It comes down to the communication.
Yeah,
Certainly.
yeah.
Certainly. To let your
And
partner know what you want and need.
I'm not the greatest listener sometimes. So, and
You're
I
a
think
great listener. You're
that
a great listener.
that but men should want to close this gap.
Absolutely.
It makes for a more satisfied partner.
And
And
there's men that sadly don't care to close it.
mhm,
They are just they're on a mission, and then it's done.
mhm.
And it's done. And those men typically don't have satisfied partners.
And then that only gets worse over time, because both men and women have needs, and there's different ways to get the needs. And sometimes you can use that through guilt and saying, you haven't had sex with me for a month, and then starting out with guilt. How do you get aroused by that? You can't.
You can't.
Not when you start out like that.
Right.
And so changing that to something completely different is critical, because what you want is an enthusiastic partner.
You want to close that gap.
Yeah, you don't want a reluctant partner. You want somebody who's incredibly enthusiastic. We all want that, is to have somebody who wants us and to be enthusiastic. And you don't get that by trying to manipulate, guilt somebody in, or saying some of the things that men typically say. And I hate to gang up on men. Guys, I'm sorry. But it's really, it is a lot our fault. And it's the way that we've been raised, the way that we've been, that we see what we see on TV, the way that that we talk to one another, and all of those things. I think we've got some room for growth there.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of men that start out that marathon race, and they're at the finish line drinking the Gatorade, and you got the lady on mile 6 just trying to catch up. Whereas I think there needs to be a way to come together and get at that finish line at the same time.
Mhm.
Not necessarily at the same time, but at least both get to the finish line. Wait for your partner to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
If you've already gotten there and you're drinking your Gatorade, help her get to the end of it.
Yeah,
Help her get across.
I think that's a great idea. What other things do you think that we're missing? Have you had
Alcohol.
this?
Alcohol plays a role in orgasms.
Tell
I
me.
feel like alcohol. I feel like it's harder with having alcohol in your system to reach orgasm. At least I know for me, if I've had a lot to drink, chances are it's going to be much harder for me to reach orgasm than not. So I think alcohol plays a huge role in an orgasm gap.
I can
For men
also,
too. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes they can't get on that flight just because they had too much to drink. But I do think that there's alcohol-related orgasms issues as well. I
Yeah.
think that can play a role in it.
And I think that that plays to the role of we do make time for certain things in our life, the things that are important. We make time to exercise. We don't try to fit exercise in between bites of a sandwich. You make a
Make
certain amount of
time for
time
it.
as a priority, and I think having a dedicated bit of time that
Hey, we're going to explore and play today.
yep,
Yeah,
yep,
you're not in a
having
rush.
yes, and I think that that's kind of fun to be able to take and say, yeah, we're closing the door, we're turning off our phones, and we're gonna have some fun.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Are there things that you wish you would have been told about orgasm and sex growing up?
Um, yeah, I wish I would have been told anything about sex growing up. I came from a very Southern Baptist family where we didn't talk about it. What I learned about sex, I learned through sex ed, which was also in a Bible Belt state, so which was not much. So I think that that plays a huge role in educating, and teaching people to be okay, comfortable talking with it,
So,
talking
what was your
about it.
source? Was your source just your friends? Did you read? How did you learn about?
I feel like um, up until even college I think it was a lot of just like exploring and learning. I think for me, learning my own body as I've gotten older, I'm more comfortable with my own body and what my wants and needs are. Um, and I feel like life is short. Why not reach orgasm? I mean, you gotta, it is, you gotta learn your body and be comfortable with it. But yeah, certainly talking with friends growing up, talking about it, trying different things. But no, it was never taught to me. I never had anybody ever sit down as a child and say, let's talk about sex and this is what happens. This is how it goes. It was more of a taboo subject in our household. We weren't going to talk about that. It just didn't get talked about.
So, I got to ask: did you read romance novels? Those bodice ripping kind of romance novels?
I did a few. I've read a few of those. There was a Sleeping Beauty series that was pretty erotic. Um, but yeah, I think just kind of learning how about your own body, but I don't have a really one pinpoint way of how I learned that because it was not through my childhood, that's for certain. Yeah, what about you?
Well, you talk about those romance novels, and that's kind of the classic quintessential story of a cis man and woman getting together, and she always climaxes with they say the throbbing member. I mean, that's such a and so that expectation is there sometimes
Even
for
in
women
books. Mhm.
as well as men. And I had gotten some very a lot. I read so much as a kid, and I was very sexually inexperienced. So all of my expectations were based on books, and they weren't informative books. They were popular books, and so I had no idea about what to
What to
expect, what
expect.
and what was what. But I also had that expectation that I should know, and so I'm not going to admit to ignorance because, when men are talking to men, we talk about how, as if we should know that, she really, yeah, she really enjoyed me last night. When in the truth of the matter is, yeah, she didn't. And how do you tell? I
Right,
mean,
how do you tell? How do you tell?
she didn't tell me because she didn't want to hurt my feelings or make me feel
And women have to
inadequate.
speak up.
I mean,
That's on the female. They have to speak up and say what their needs are.
mhm.
I agree.
Men want to feel like heroes. That's ingrained to us from the very beginning,
Mhm.
and so I think that any woman who makes a man feel like a hero is great, but it should be authentic. It should be a way to make him truly know you, so that he can feel like that hero.
Yep, I agree. Agree.
But yeah, otherwise, you learn about sex through trial and error. But if you've got a partner who's willing to communicate, I talk to a lot of people who have that one partner who said, "Oh yeah, he or she taught me this, and really showed me and influenced me on really what was going on." And it takes that kind of a brave partner to be able to do that. The right
Absolutely.
kind of partner.
The right kind of partner.
Yeah, who
Right.
doesn't do it in a kind of a disparaging way. Like,
Right.
what the heck are you doing? Which has happened to me.
So, anyways, I think that we do need an episode eventually on aging and sex.
Mhm.
I think that would be a great talk.
Well, since we're both aging fast, we better make it one of our next
You
topics.
faster than me. Thanks for joining us on a cheeky adventure through the world of wellness. Follow our spicy tips, laugh out loud stories, and expert advice designed to keep you feeling youthful, vibrant, and always in the loop.
Follow the show so you don't miss a beat. Stay connected and let's keep the fun going.
And if there's a subject that you'd like to hear more about, please let us know. You can connect with us by clicking the contact link below or send us a message on social media.
Make sure to send this episode to a friend who could benefit from today's topics. And don't forget to leave the show a 5-star review.
Thanks for listening to The Cheeky Clinic. We'll see you in the next one.